They thought they were meeting heroes of the German resistance. Instead, the Gestapo was waiting, pins ready, guns hidden. Berlin, autumn 1942. The city moved like a machine running out of oil, too loud, too bright, too proud to admit it was breaking down. The war had reached its fever pitch. Bombers over the Ruhr, convoys sinking in the Atlantic. And yet, somewhere in the middle of it all, whispers began to spread through the German officer corps. Whispers about men, inside the Wehrmacht itself, who believed the Führer had led their country to madness. In Lisbon, a city caught between war and neutrality, British intelligence had been listening. MI6 had set up its listening posts in cafes and hotels, where secrets were traded as casually as sugar packets. That's where the message arrived, a letter written in perfect English, signed by Colonel von Gewernitz. He claimed to represent a group of senior officers determined to overthrow Hitler. They needed contact, he said. They needed London. The letter found its way to Section D of MI6, and from there, to a man whose name would later appear in every intelligence file stamped Venlo incident. Major Sigismund Payne Best. Best was 48, a gentleman's spy, educated, meticulous, too polite for the world he lived in. He'd served in the Great War, spoke fluent German, and still believed in the idea that somewhere, beneath all the blood, there was honor left in Europe. When he read the letter, he felt a chill of hope. At the safe house on Rua de Gloria, Best met his superior, Richard Stevens, head of the British Passport Control Office, the official cover for MI6. On the table between them lay the letter, the edges already creased from being passed through too many hands. Stevens said quietly, "They want to meet near the Dutch border. Officers of the Abwehr, disillusioned men, supposedly. They can deliver information from inside the Reich." Best lifted his eyes. "Do we have confirmation of the code word?" Stevens shook his head. "That's the problem. The letter includes a cipher key, Cicero. It's not in any of our registries. So it could be a trap. Or it could end the war." Best exhaled, staring out the window at the sea. Fishing boats bobbed under the Portuguese sun. For a moment, he imagined a different Europe, one where people like von Gewernitz existed, brave enough to defy a tyrant. He turned back. "We meet them." In Berlin, a world away, the same letter lay on a different desk. The paper was identical, but the hand that held it wore a leather glove. SS Sturmbannführer Walter Schellenberg studied it in silence, while cigarette smoke curled around him. The office was cold. The blackout curtains cut the light into ribbons. Across from him, an aide waited with a notepad. "Operation England Spiel begins," Schellenberg said at last. The aide nodded, writing quickly. "We'll need English speakers. Use prisoners. Polish agents, perhaps. Teach them the code phrases. Make it convincing." "And the meeting?" Schellenberg smiled, thinly. "Venlo, near the Maas River. It's close enough to England to make them feel safe." The aide hesitated. "And if they don't come?" "Oh, they'll come," Schellenberg said. "The English can't resist the idea of a good German." Weeks passed. In Lisbon, Best and Stevens prepared their travel orders, officially listed as commercial representatives. Their driver, Jan Lemmens, a Dutch civilian, received the simple instruction, "Cross into Venlo. Wait by the river." Best packed a briefcase with false papers, a revolver he hoped not to use, and 2 small envelopes sealed in wax, one for the supposed resistance, and one, in case of death, for London. The night before departure, he wrote a letter to his wife in Geneva. "Tomorrow may be the beginning of peace. Pray that decency still exists, even among our enemies." In Berlin, another letter was written, this one to Reinhard Heydrich's personal office. It outlined the bait, the timing, the men to be used, and one chilling line. "The English will bring us their network on a silver plate." On November 10, 1942, Best and Stevens arrived at a small cafe near The Hague. Their contact, Captain von Lutzow, sent word that the final meeting would be held the next morning at the riverbank near Venlo, just across the German border. Rain swept across the lowlands that night. The roads were slick, the air heavy with smoke from distant towns. Best sat awake in his hotel room, rereading the letter that had started it all. The ink had bled slightly from the humidity, the signature still clear at the bottom. For the sake of Germany. He wanted to believe. He needed to. At dawn, he met Stevens and Lemmens by the car. The engine sputtered to life. Best looked out through the windshield as they drove north, the gray sky pressing low, the border only miles ahead. Do you think they're real? Stevens asked. Men who'd risk death to stop Hitler? They must be. Or they know we want to believe they are, Stevens murmured. Best said nothing. His fingers tightened on the briefcase resting on his lap. Behind them, miles away in Dusseldorf, a group of Gestapo officers climbed into an Opel Blitz truck. They carried no flags, no insignia, just pistols, false documents, and one short order: retrieve the English alive. The two convoys moved toward each other through the fog, unaware, or perhaps unwilling to see, how close the lines between hope and deception had already blurred. In London, the wireless operators waited for a message that would never come. And in the MI6 logbook dated October 29, 1942, a clerk typed a short, unremarkable line. Contact established with German resistance group near Venlo, Netherlands. Today, historians mark that line as the first step into one of the most devastating intelligence traps of the war. November 11, 1942. The car with Best and Stevens crossed into Venlo. They had no idea that none of the men they were meant to meet actually existed. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. They parked by the Maas River, fog curling low over the reeds. The world smelled of wet iron and leaf rot. 10 a.m., November 11, 1942. Their tires crunched on the gravel near the border post. Major Sigismund Payne Best checked his pocket watch, exactly on time. The driver, Jan Lemons, wiped condensation from the windshield. Beside him, Captain Richard Stevens struck a match, let it burn down to his fingers, then blew it out. They said 2 men, Stevens murmured. Civilians. Code name Lutzow. Best nodded. If they exist. From the mist, shapes emerged, 2 figures walking slowly, hands visible, coats buttoned to the throat. The first, tall, clean-shaven, smiled with practiced ease. Her Best, I presume? His English was precise, faintly accented. Best stepped forward, extending his hand before instinct could stop him. The handshake was firm, rehearsed. Colonel von Lutzow. A polite nod. We must be quick. Dutch patrols are close. Stevens watched every movement. Their shoes too new, their coats identical. Your code word, he said flatly. The man didn't blink. Cicero. The air froze. Best exhaled. Then we can talk. The world split open. Tires on gravel. A truck burst from the fog, headlights cutting white fire through the mist. Men in gray coats leapt out, guns drawn, shouting German orders. Lemons slammed the horn. A bullet shattered the windshield. Stevens reached for his revolver, but a hand gripped his wrist, twisting hard. The smell of cordite filled the air. Came Bugum. No movement. Boots, shouts, a struggle in mud. Best hit the ground, his breath torn out of him. The colonel calmly pocketed the letter from his coat, the same one he'd sent weeks earlier. Lemons was dragged from the car, blood running down his temple. Stevens shouted, "You're violating Dutch soil." The reply came smooth, in English, "History won't care about borders today." They were thrown into a van. Doors slammed. Darkness. The vehicle lurched forward, rattling over cobblestones. Through a crack in the metal, Best saw the river slide away behind them, disappearing into fog. He turned to Stevens, whispering, "They knew our names, even our passwords." Stevens's voice came low. "We were never meeting allies. We walked into a stage play." Hours blurred. A stop, a gate, then floodlights. Dusseldorf. A courtyard smelling of diesel and rain. Papers stamped, signatures signed, everything neat and final. Their belongings were catalogued: a watch, false passports, and a tiny glass capsule of cyanide. The officer who took it smiled. "No need for that, Her Best. We prefer conversations to martyrs." In the interrogation room, the polite man from the river waited with a notebook. "You met our friends today," he said, crossing his legs. "They performed well." Best glared. "You're Gestapo." The man tilted his head. "Names are less important than results." He opened the notebook. Inside were call signs, British, authentic, and phrases only SOE agents would know. "We already have your network," he said softly. "But we'd like to confirm the spelling." Best stared at the page. His own security checks, his own words, copied perfectly. "How long have you?" "Since Lisbon," the man interrupted. "The first letter? We wrote it." The silence that followed felt heavier than any blow. Stevens's eyes met his. One brief exchange between two men realizing the scale of what had been lost. That night, in Berlin, champagne corks echoed in a darkened office on Prinz-Albrechtstrasse. A coded telegram went out to all stations. Englandspiel successful. Agents secured. In London, the MI6 wireless room clicked alive. A message arrived from their men in Holland. The operator smiled. It contained the right cipher check, the correct cadence. They made contact, he said. Operation moving forward. No one noticed the subtle change in rhythm. The way the dots and dashes were just a fraction too precise. At the riverbank, hours later, soldiers found only footprints in the mud and a broken cigarette crushed into the earth. The fog had already covered the rest. The British think their agents are speaking, Schellenberg said. In truth, it's our typewriter that has the accent. Winter 1943, Berlin. In the basement on Prinz-Albrechtstrasse, the walls sweated and the light was the color of old bone. Three men sat at a table with a British transmitter resting like a trophy between ashtrays. A Dutch operator, captured outside Utrecht, tapped the key with clinical patience while a German linguist watched the clock. On a side table, an English Remington typewriter waited to dress every reply in the right clothes. London called at 8:10. The room stilled. Only the drip in the corner and the faint hum of the generator persisted. The first message from SOE. Sunflower down safe. Locals cooperative. Supplies required. The German operator lifted an eyebrow. The linguist nodded. He typed the reply they had prepared the night before, including the tiny bluff check that proved authenticity to London, an intentional misspelling, the habitual flourish of the agent who, by now, was a number in a ledger. The key clacked. The line carried it away. Somewhere under Whitehall, a duty officer smiled and jotted a tick in the margin. Thus began England's spiel, the England game. The rules were simple. London would speak, Berlin would answer in a borrowed voice, and in the Netherlands men would land in the dark, guided by flares the Germans themselves had set. Parachutes bloomed, boots hit peat, and within minutes a torch would blink the agreed pattern. The welcome party wore Dutch caps and perfect English. By sunrise, the new arrivals sat handcuffed in a truck, their radio already boxed for Berlin. In the SOE section off Baker Street, the maps of Holland bristled with pins. Hague/Leiden/Eindhoven. Reports stacked in neat optimism. Drops completed, containers received, cells expanding. An officer scribbled, excellent progress. Dutch morale high. When a junior signaler whispered that a few messages felt too tidy, he was overruled. War needed victories on paper. Below Berlin, victory inked itself in silence. The Germans learned more than code groups. They learned habits. A certain agent ended every second message with regards, H. Another always confused there and there. The linguist imitated their rhythms until even the jokes sounded right. When London asked for proof of life, Berlin included some. The name of a landlady, the color of a bicycle, an inside crack about British tea. Each detail had been taken during a night of questions no one upstairs would hear. The result was arithmetic. Each time London, trusting the checks, scheduled a drop, a new circle closed. Each time London congratulated a successful sabotage, another farm was raided and its owners taken away before dawn. Factories that should have smoked less smoked more. Communications that should have quickened resistance instead mapped it. By spring, the ledger grew obscene. More than 50 SOE agents funneled through the same charade. Hundreds of Dutch helpers followed. On a gray morning in April, a clerk at RSHA typed a column of names too long for one sheet, slid a second into the carriage, and kept going. He poured coffee and did not meet his own reflection in the window. Sometimes even the captors blinked. A young operator from Delft, barely 20, sat at the Berlin quay with a sergeant watching. London asked, "How is your ankle?" He hesitated. The sergeant placed 2 fingers on his wrist and found the pulse. "Right," he said. The boy did. The message sent, the sergeant looked away first. In London, medals were proposed. A senior memoranda praised the admirable resilience of our Dutch circuits. A case officer drafted a note of thanks to an agent codenamed Peter, ending with, "Splendid work. Keep pressure on." That same afternoon, Peter was marched from his cell in Heron to a courtyard to stand in line and look at a wall. There were warnings. A Danish channel reported odd regularities. A French liaison mentioned that Dutch messages had lost their human smudge. A signals officer pointed out that the mandatory security check was missing once, then twice, then reappeared too consistently, as if someone had put authenticity on a metronome. The paper went upstairs and came back down with penciled reassurance. Checked. All in order. By autumn 1943, Berlin no longer hurried. They had turned the faucet and London kept the water running. Weapons intended for resistance swelled German evidence rooms. Radios stacked like bread loaves in antechambers. The English Remington needed a new ribbon. The linguist asked for a raise and received a medal. And still the line clicked. SOE requested sabotage of a rail spur near Amersfoort. The reply, typed in Berlin, keyed by a Dutch prisoner, confirmed, action to proceed on night of 14th. That night, a squad waited by the culvert and took the men in the act. In London, someone toasted the explosion that never was. Official histories would later count the damage. England Spiel, 1942 to 1944, rolled up almost the entire Dutch SOE network. Over 50 field agents captured, scores executed or sent east, caches seized, plans inverted. The phrase, "our man in Holland," became a grim joke, their man, wearing our voice. One afternoon in late 43, a package arrived at Prins Albrechtstrasse, a British fruitcake and a typed letter on Esli stationery. To our indomitable colleagues in Holland, our gratitude. The Germans opened the cake in the radio room. Someone laughed, then stopped, embarrassed by the echo. The linguist cut a neat slice, tasted, and said, "Almond." In London that same week, a file clerk placed a gold paperclip on a thin folder marked Venlo, follow-on contacts. He didn't know the name on the last page. He filed it under V and went to lunch. Down in the Berlin basement, the key tapped again. SOE asked for a status from codename Mary. The linguist dictated, "Church bells tonight. Spirits good. Request 2 sets of timers." The Dutch operator's hands trembled. The sergeant rested those same 2 fingers on his wrist until the tremor steadied. The message flew. Supplies scheduled to drop. A truck warmed its engine. The machine had learned the shape of hope and fed on it. And on a cold morning when the fog made Berlin look like London and London like anywhere else, Schellenberg signed a memo, phase complete. Proceed to exploitation. In Whitehall, a bell rang for tea. On Baker Street, a telegram of congratulations was typed for an agent already wearing prison gray. The envelope was addressed. A runner carried it down the corridor, smiling. Every message from Holland sounded right. Every word felt real, except one detail no one noticed. Spring 1943. London was finally catching its breath after the Blitz, but inside the offices of the Special Operations Executive on Baker Street, the war never slowed. The clatter of typewriters and the hiss of radios filled the rooms like a heartbeat. To the officers of SOE, the network in Holland was their brightest success. Messages arriving daily, operations executed, supplies distributed. On paper, it was flawless. On the morning of April 22nd, Major Stanley stood in front of the situation map. Red pins marked enemy losses, blue pins, Allied progress. A cluster of green pins, Holland. "Our Dutch boys are performing miracles," he said, tapping the map with his pipe. Bridges sabotaged, trains derailed, even a German fuel depot gone up near Utrecht. The young analysts nodded, exhausted but proud. No one asked why the reports always came with perfect timing or why not a single encoded message showed distress signs. In war, good news didn't require scrutiny. Across the channel, the opposite scene unfolded. A damp field outside Rotterdam, midnight. The air pulsed with the drone of an aircraft. Searchlights were off, for now. German officers crouched beside a truck, their breath white in the dark. The radio crackled once, then went still. The first parachute opened, a white bloom against the stars. "Target inbound," said the German in charge, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. He lifted a megaphone, waited until the figure dropped within range, and smiled. "Welcome to Holland," he said in perfect English. The flares erupted. The field became a stage, light, shouting, boots through mud. The agent barely hit the ground before the rifles surrounded him. The crate of weapons followed, thudding into the earth. One of the Germans picked up the agent's radio and held it like a prize. In Berlin, Schellenberg read the report that night. Good, he said. Keep the show going. London loves applause. By then, England's spiel had turned from a trap into an art form. Gestapo officers studied their captured radios like musicians learning new instruments. They practiced tone, rhythm, even typing quirks. The key to deception wasn't brilliance, it was imitation. The English don't doubt, Schellenberg told his staff, because they want to believe. That's our greatest weapon. They kept believing. London sent more men, more money, more guns. Entire airlifts of explosives vanished into German hands. When one Dutch agent was executed in The Hague, his captors photographed his radio, polished it, and used it to send his final mission report. Back in London, a clerk named Alice Grant noticed something odd. These reports, she said to her superior, they're all written in the same rhythm. Same idioms, same spacing. Her supervisor laughed. Perhaps they learned from the same schoolmaster, Miss Grant. The matter ended there. Meanwhile, the Gestapo refined the illusion. They had captured so many agents that they built a file for each: handwriting samples, speech patterns, personal jokes. When London requested verification, Berlin simply provided it. Tell London the cheese here tastes like home, they'd write. The line, meaningless to anyone else, matched an old inside joke between two real SOE agents. In July 1943, the Germans staged an entire fake operation. Using a captured radio team, they requested a weapons drop near Amersfoort. London approved it immediately. The Germans lit the field with the agreed-upon pattern of torches, 3 quick, 1 long, and watched as the sky opened. Crates floated down, perfect and intact. By dawn, the supplies were loaded onto German trucks, and the prisoners were back in their cells. One of them, Jack Winston, would later recall in a post-war interview. They even used our code phrases, jokes we thought only friends knew. When I heard my own words coming back through the wire, I knew we were ghosts. In the summer heat of Berlin, Schellenberg celebrated the efficiency of his orchestra. He poured himself a glass of schnapps and read aloud the latest intercepted telegram. Successful drop, resistance strong, he said, smiling. Gentlemen, we are their resistance. Each deception deepened London's confidence. Reports of successful sabotage reached Churchill's desk. In an internal memo, SOE's Dutch section was praised for exceptional initiative under occupation. Medals were recommended. No one realized they were congratulating ghosts. But even perfect illusions fray. In late autumn, during a routine audit of transmissions, a signals officer named Lieutenant John Peck grew restless. The Dutch agents used security checks, tiny prearranged errors in every message to prove they weren't compromised. But reviewing the transcripts, Peck noticed something missing. None of the transmissions from Holland contained the check marks. Not one. He went to his superior, hands trembling slightly as he held the file. Sir, every message we've received for months has been clean. Too clean. The major frowned. Clean. Peck pointed to the line of dots and dashes. No deliberate mistake. No safety mark. That means they're sending under duress, or not sending at all. The room fell silent. Impossible, the major said finally. We'd know. Peck closed the folder. Would we? Outside, rain tapped against the glass of Baker Street. The radio sets kept clicking, voices from Holland still whispering their flawless lies. But now, for the first time, someone in London had begun to listen for what wasn't there. The silence between the dots, the truth hiding behind perfection. And once heard, it could never be unheard. It was a small mistake, one tiny that betrayed an empire. Winter 1943. London was wrapped in fog and fatigue. Inside the offices of the Special Operations Executive on Baker Street, the air smelled of burnt coffee and hot radio valves. Lieutenant John Peck, a signals analyst barely 26, sat surrounded by reams of coded transmissions from Holland. Lines of dots and dashes filled the pages like a language of ghosts. He traced one message with his finger, then another. Perfect. Too perfect. Every signal from the Dutch network read clean. No stumbles, no hesitations, no sign of distress. And then it hit him. The security check mark, a tiny deliberate flaw each agent added to prove they weren't sending under duress, was missing. Not once. Not ever. Peck spread the papers across the floor, heart pounding. Months of messages, all immaculate. He counted dates, compared ciphers. The pattern was absolute. Either every agent had forgotten the rule, or none of them were free. He went straight to Major Stanley's office. The older man barely looked up from his pipe and maps. "What is it, Peck?" "Sir," Peck said, laying out the papers. "They're all fake. Every message from Holland." Stanley frowned. "Impossible. We've confirmed their success reports. Sabotage, supply drops, everything matches." Peck tapped the paper. "Look closer. The check mark. It's gone. Not a single one in 6 months." Stanley stared at the pages. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. "We'd know," he said finally, quietly. Peck held his gaze. "Would we?" The question hung like smoke. By the next morning, the files were circulating through higher offices, folded, stamped, dismissed, revived. No one wanted to believe it. The illusion had worked too well. Holland was their success story, the model operation. To doubt it now meant admitting the unthinkable, that London had been sending its own men to die. Reports from the continent were brushed aside. A Danish contact warned of strange rhythms in Dutch messages. A French liaison said the tone had gone machine-like. An old operator in the basement muttered that the signals were too clean to be human. Each warning was filed, initialed, forgotten. Then, in January 1944, a classified memo circulated quietly through SOE. "We continued communications for months after all agents were compromised." Peck read it twice. The words seemed unreal, like reading an obituary written in the first person. He found Stanley that evening by the wireless sets. The major looked older, his face gray in the light of the tubes. "They sent us perfection," he said. "And we believed it because we wanted to. The Gestapo didn't destroy us, Peck. Our faith did." The next day, a final test was sent to Holland, a message containing a new, secret challenge code known only to London. The reply came back fast, confident, and wrong. Peck was there when the operator wrote the last line in the logbook. "All Dutch circuits suspended pending verification." Then he switched off the radio. The sudden silence felt heavier than any explosion. A week later, a courier carried Peck's report upstairs, a concise summary of failure. Germany intercepted, impersonated, and reversed SOE Dutch traffic between 1942 and 1943. All transmissions falsified. Recommend immediate procedural overhaul. He signed it without pride. No one spoke about it again. The maps were cleared, the pins removed. In official briefings, the disaster became a communications lapse. But Peck couldn't forget the sound of that last message, the perfect rhythm of a voice that wasn't real. Somewhere beyond the channel, men London still listed as active were standing in prison courtyards, waiting for the crack of a rifle bolt. And London, at last, had fallen silent. In spring 1944, the air at Dachau tasted of lime and smoke. The barracks walls sweated cold. The cots were closer than thoughts. Men learned to measure time by the rattle of the soup cart and the way the guards' boots found the same cracks in the floor. Among the prisoners were the ones London still called active on paper: Dutch couriers, French saboteurs, 2 British radio men. They carried themselves like soldiers until the wire taught them a different posture: head level, eyes low, hands saved for work. Ludwig van den Berg had been first in, first fooled, first to understand the rules of the new game. Answer when asked: forget what sleep feels like, protect whatever cannot be broken. His fingers, once good at keys, were swollen and cracked now. At night, against the straw, he tapped with 2 nails on the cot frame. Point, dash, pause. Absurd fragments of messages with no receiver. The others listened like men listening to rain. A guard named Roth watched their barack. Older than most, he had the stillness of someone who had done soldiering before orders learned a different accent. When he counted heads, he didn't shout. Once, as Van den Berg stood too long at the frozen spigot, Roth stepped close and said, in careful English, "You fought clean. I hope someone remembers that." He kept his eyes on the tap while he said it, as if even kindness had to be smuggled. The days layered. Roll call under a sky the color of zinc. Labor in a workshop that smelled of oil and carbolic. Nights where the generator's hum felt like a wire to another world. Sometimes the prisoners spoke in tricks. Half-phrases that could be finished 3 ways. Memories with the names cut out. They shared a dictionary of glances. The group learned to breathe together when the door opened. Letters came rarely, mostly to men who were already gone. Once, after an inspection, Van den Berg found a scrap of brown paper pressed under his blanket. In pencil, tight to the edge so no knife could find it. Someone had written, "Tell my wife that the radio still sings in my head." He folded it into a matchbox and hid it in the wall behind a loose plank where chalk had recorded the first snow, the first thaw, the day the quinine ran out. In April, the block chief brought orders. 2 of the captured sets would be reassembled. The rumor ran before the words. Berlin wanted a confirmation transmission. The Germans wheeled in crates with the quiet pride of men showing off a repaired engine. The sets were British, polished, smelling faintly of sea and dust, some lever still firm with London's oil. The prisoners stared as if seeing ghosts. They were marched to a room that could have been a school once. Chalkboard, cracked skylight, a portrait hook with no portrait. A sergeant arranged the chairs with theater care. A man in a gray suit, hair parted like a line on a map, placed a form on the table. "You will send exactly this," he said, tapping the words as if teaching pronunciation. "If you say more, we will say less to someone else." The text was simple, obscene in its calm. Mission proceeding. Spirits high. Request timers and detonators. Advise next drop. The operator from Eindhoven swallowed. Van den Berg met his eyes and nodded once. He rolled his shoulders like a man loosening before a race with no finish. The key felt like a hand he had once known. He added the old rhythm. Human hesitations, the tiny breath before a word that matters. And then, at the end where the security check should live, he left it blank. A hole shaped like truth. The sergeant's eyebrow twitched. The man in the gray suit did not blink. The message flew into the wire. Back on the block, a Dutchman named Keys asked, "Would they hear us?" He meant London. Van den Berg shook his head. "They will hear what they need." He lay back and tapped the slat again. Point, dash, pause, until his fingers ached with memory. Roth came on late shift and found the men awake in the wrong quiet. He set his rifle against the wall and checked the window latch twice for no reason. "Weather," he said, in German, to no one. Then, softly, in English again, "It is almost Easter." He made the sign of a cross so small it could have been a habit of scratching. The next morning, 2 names were called. Peter, H. The yard knew the choreography. Line, step, door, the closeness of air that follows. The men stood straighter, not out of bravery, but because their bodies remembered drills from another life. Van den Berg felt his throat dry and thought of a field in Brabant, a wireless hidden in hay, the sound of a flare-cutting cloud. He had no prayers left that used words. Afternoon brought a strange mercy. The workshop foreman released them early. A bucket of water appeared that did not taste of rust. A French agent tore his bread in 3 pieces and gave one to a Belgian he had never liked. At lights out, the barack hummed. Low, the way a hive resists winter. They did not say names. They did not count. They held the silence like contraband. When the summons came for the radio room again, Van den Berg knew it would be the last. The paper on the table had fewer words, proceeding. "Oh well." He looked at the man in the gray suit and said, in Dutch, "You could just write it yourself." The man smiled without teeth. "We like the music of authenticity." The key answered the only way it could. He sent their absence with perfect grammar. In London, a clerk logged the message and put a neat tick in the right-hand column. The file jacket did not tremble when she placed it on the stack. Back in the yard, snow began again, though the calendar insisted on spring. Roth stood at the gate and watched it pick out the wire in white. Under his breath, he said, in the voice of a man who could not afford comprehension, "I hope someone remembers." Night rolled across the roofs. The barack waited, faces turned toward a door that would either open or not. Van den Berg pressed the matchbox into the crack behind the plank. He whispered the note inside. Not code, not report, just the cadence of a life lived at a key. "The radio sings in my head." Down the corridor, the radio room light burned late. In Berlin, a telephone rang, and someone said "Ja" in a tone that meant now. Somewhere a train was being scheduled. Somewhere a list was being shortened to fit a page. Months later, London would understand what had been missing all along. But that night in Dachau, the Gestapo was already arranging its final triumph, an ending that needed no messages at all, only doors, and the men who would be made to walk through them. Berlin, May 1945. The air in the ruined ministries smelled of plaster, dust, and ink that had burned but not quite died. Allied officers moved through hallways where ceilings hung like torn maps. On Prinz Albrechtstrasse, where the Gestapo once ruled behind polished doors, a U.S. documents team pried open a rusted filing room. Water trickled from pipes. Every sound echoed too long. Captain Lewis from the U.S. Army's intelligence unit knelt beside a stack of boxes stamped RSHA. He brushed away soot and read the labels. Agenton, Holland, Funkspiel. He called to the British major behind him, a man named Fraser, who carried a notebook thick with war's leftovers. They lifted one crate together. Inside lay neatly tied bundles of paper, perfect German order surviving amid the chaos. The first file they opened began with a British call sign. Typed in English, the message was smooth, polite, confident. Successful operation near Amersfoort. Morale high. Fraser frowned. They're ours, he said quietly. Lewis turned the page. The next sheet bore a bold header. YNGLANDSBAL. Below, in the same tidy hand, 54 agents neutralized. 50 executed. 0 escapes. Neither man spoke. The papers whispered when turned. One page showed diagrams of radio frequencies, another a list of British security checks. Fraser ran a finger down the column. Next to each, the Germans had written translations, notes on handwriting quirks, even jokes. One line read, H closes with regards, imitate. Another, P always misuses there. Lewis found a memo stapled to a newspaper clipping. The headline, Dutch resistance strikes again. A German officer's pencil circled it neatly and added, Danke. At the bottom of the box sat a thin folder. Best, Sigismund Payne Venlo. Fraser opened it and found a single-page summary of the 1942 abduction. Receipts for seized radios. A note of commendation signed by a name both men recognized from post-war interrogation lists. But tucked between the pages was something stranger, a letter typed on British stationery. Splendid work, keep pressure on. London's praise. Filed beside execution orders. They stared at it under the gray light of the blown-out window. Outside, Berlin was rebuilding. Inside, the evidence of its perfection lay too clean. Across the city, other Allied teams unearthed similar archives, wireless logs, interrogation reports, and sheets of onion-skin telegrams that still smelled faintly of machine oil. Each file was a mirror London hadn't wanted to face. The reports to MI6 arrived weeks later. Operation Englandspiel confirmed. Complete compromise of SOE networks in Holland, 1942-44. In London, the response was bureaucratic silence. Committees met behind closed doors. The phrase, unavoidable circumstances, appeared in the minutes. A senior officer wrote a line later struck from the record. We deceived ourselves far more thoroughly than they deceived us. Sigismund Payne Best, the man whose trust had begun it all, survived the war and returned to England a ghost of order and propriety. When he read the declassified papers, his hand trembled once, then steadied. In his memoir he wrote, The war taught me that trust is the sharpest weapon, and it cuts both ways. But truth escaped the pages. In the Netherlands, a farmer plowing near Eindhoven turned up a rusted parachute clasp and kept it on his fence post like a gravestone. In The Hague, a widow told her son his father had worked with the post because explaining betrayal was harder than explaining death. In a London flat, a mother still received a postcard every Christmas, a reprint of the last one her son sent before he vanished. The words had faded, but the last line remained clear, see you soon. When the official inquiry finally closed, its language was careful, clinical. Communications integrity compromised due to operator error and overconfidence in field verification. The file ended with a single recommendation. In future, mistrust perfection. A young archivist, cataloging the recovered materials, stopped over one item, a dented British radio transmitter marked H2. A note pinned to it read, Replica, original lost in Berlin, 1945. She turned it over and noticed a faint engraving scratched into the metal, a short dash, a dot, another dash. She didn't recognize the code. Years later, the story of Englandspiel became a lecture topic, a cautionary phrase whispered by intelligence officers. Never let the message be cleaner than the man. The operation was cited in training manuals as a masterpiece of deception. But in the places that mattered, in kitchens, in churchyards, In the minds of those who waited, it was just another way the war refused to end. Captain Lewis and Major Fraser sealed the crates at dusk. On the lid, they wrote to London, SOE Archives, and paused before hammering the nails. Fraser looked once more at the British letter inside the Vinlow file, the cheerful, splendid work, and shook his head. The tragedy, he said quietly, wasn't that they fooled us. Lewis waited. It's that we wanted so badly to believe they hadn't. He dropped the hammer once, sealing the box. Dust rose, drifted, and settled over the floor like ash. Outside, the wind moved through the ruined streets, rattling a loose wire somewhere far away, a faint tapping, like a signal no one was left to hear.